Imagine walking through your hometown and seeing a battered German shepherd tied to a sign that reads, $5 for the beast. Would you keep walking or would you stop? This story begins with a young officer, his little sister, and a scarred dog whose past holds more secrets than anyone could imagine. What unfolds next is a journey of danger, loyalty, and the quiet kind of courage that can change lives forever. But before we dive in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And from my heart to yours, may you have a wonderful day filled with kindness and hope. The late summer sun hung heavy over the small mountain town of Ravenwood, Montana, a place tucked between ridges of pine and sandstone where the streets ran narrow and the houses seemed to lean in toward each other as though whispering secrets. The heat of the day lingered even as dusk approached, pressing down like a hand that would not lift, making the asphalt shimmer with a wavering mirage and casting long golden shadows across the storefronts. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the mingled scents of fried dough from a food stand and dust from the old gravel road that cut through Main Street. It was on this evening that Officer Ethan Calder, only 28 years old and barely 2 years into his service, found his life turning in a direction he could never have anticipated. Ethan was tall and lean, with a strength earned not from vanity, but from years of disciplined training. His dark brown hair was cut short, though in the fading light it revealed strands sun-bleached from long days patrolling outdoors. His eyes were hazel, steady, yet restless, often betraying a quiet determination that had kept him pushing forward since tragedy had struck his family. Ethan was not yet hardened like many of the older officers in the Ravenwood Police Department, but the weight of responsibility already lined his face. 3 years earlier, he had lost both parents in a car accident, and since then, he had carried the role of guardian to his little sister Maya. That duty had shaped him into a man who put others' safety above his own comfort, but it also left him with nights where loneliness pressed as heavily as the Montana sun. Beside him skipped Maya Calder, 9 years old, with a face as bright as an open meadow. She had long, sandy blonde hair that she often tied into 2 slightly crooked braids, giving her an air of careless innocence. Her eyes, wide and gray-blue like storm clouds caught in sunlight, shone with curiosity that seemed unquenchable. Maya wore a light green cotton dress that brushed her knees, with white sneakers scuffed from playground adventures. She was slender, full of energy, and often ran ahead only to circle back, her laughter rising like birdsong. Despite the loss of their parents, Maya carried a resilience that Ethan admired. She had a heart tuned toward compassion, especially for creatures smaller and weaker than herself, a trait she had inherited from their late mother, who had once volunteered at the town's animal shelter. As they walked along Main Street, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of relaxation, grateful for a day off duty and the chance to simply be a brother instead of a uniform. The town, though modest in size, carried with it both comfort and shadows. Some stores thrived, the diner with its squeaky neon sign, the small hardware shop with its dusty windows, while others stood shuttered, relics of better years. Children's laughter drifted from a side street where a game of tag unfolded, while, further along, a rusted pickup sputtered past. The quiet rhythms of Ravenwood always seemed to mask stories waiting to be uncovered. It was then that Maya tugged sharply at Ethan's arm. "Ethan," she whispered, pointing toward the bus stop ahead. There, hunched on the curb, sat a ragged man whose very presence seemed at odds with the golden calm of the evening. The man was in his 50s, though hardship had aged him more harshly. His skin was leathery from years exposed to sun and wind, his beard wiry and streaked with gray, tangled enough to hide most of his jawline. He wore a plaid flannel shirt whose colors had long since faded, torn jeans with knees shredded, and boots whose soles flapped loosely at every shift of his legs. His posture was slouched, his eyes darting with the nervous energy of someone accustomed to life on society's edges. His name, though Ethan did not know it yet, was Raymond Pike, a drifter known to locals only in passing, sometimes for loitering, sometimes for muttering half-truths in exchange for coins. Beside him, tethered by a frayed length of rope, lay a German shepherd. The dog's coat, once proud sable and black, was dulled with grime, streaked with gray along the muzzle and hind legs. Its ribs pressed faintly against the fur, evidence of long hunger. One ear bent permanently downward, as though broken years ago, and its right hind leg trembled when it shifted. Yet the most haunting feature was its eyes, deep brown, glossy with both suffering and stubbornness, as if inside the battered body there still lived a soul unwilling to surrender. A piece of cardboard leaned against Raymond's knee, letters scrawled in thick black marker. $5 for the beast. Maya stopped short, her small hand tightening around Ethan's. Her voice dropped to a tremor. "He looks so sad." Then louder, urgent. "Ethan, we can't just leave him there. Please." Ethan's gaze met the dog's for only a moment, and already his chest tightened. He had seen neglected animals before in his line of work, yet something about this one unsettled him. The dignity that clung even in ruin, the quiet endurance that spoke louder than any bark. His practical mind pushed back. "Maya," he said softly, "we don't know this dog. He could be dangerous, and we already have a lot to handle at home." But Maya was already kneeling, her braids slipping over her shoulders as she crouched near the animal. Her green dress brushed the dust of the pavement, and her eyes met the shepherd's in a silent conversation. The dog lifted its head slightly, its body trembling with effort, and for a moment the busy street faded into stillness. Maya whispered, "You're not a beast, you're just tired." Tears welled in her eyes as she turned back toward Ethan. "Please, Ethan, we can't walk away. He needs us." Raymond gave a crooked grin, revealing teeth the color of tobacco stains. $5, officer," he said, his voice rough and mocking. "That's all it takes. He ain't worth more than that." The casual cruelty in his tone made Ethan's jaw clench. He disliked the way Raymond spoke of life, as though it could be measured in coins. Ethan hesitated, pulling his worn wallet from his pocket, fingers brushing the few bills inside. He did not need another burden, not with Maya's school expenses and their modest rent. And yet, the idea of walking away from those dark, pleading eyes felt impossible. Maya's hand pressed tighter into his. "I promise I'll help. I'll take care of him. Please." Ethan let out a long breath. "All right, but he's your responsibility too." He pulled out a $5 bill and handed it over. Raymond snatched it, stuffed it into his pocket, and without another word, slung his battered backpack over one shoulder. His departure was startlingly quick, disappearing into the crowd as if eager to sever all ties. Ethan watched him vanish, unsettled by the swiftness. People who sold a possession usually lingered. This man fled. Maya, however, was already beside the dog, stroking the matted fur gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. The German shepherd gave a faint wag of its tail, then let out a fragile sound, half sigh, half whimper, as if acknowledging the shift in its fate. Ethan crouched, resting a hand lightly on the dog's head. Beneath the coarse fur, he felt the tremor of a body that had endured too much. "We'll think of a name later," he murmured. Maya brightened instantly. "He's ours now," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a vow. As the sun dipped lower, casting amber streaks across Ravenwood's Main Street, Ethan stood and looked down the road where Raymond had disappeared. His instincts as an officer whispered that something was wrong, that no man parted so quickly with a companion unless there was more hidden beneath. But he pushed the thought aside for the moment. For Maya, the only truth that mattered was simple. They had saved him. And perhaps, Ethan realized, the dog had saved them too. The following morning in Ravenwood dawned cooler than expected, the mountain air tempered by a breeze that carried the sharp scent of pine and wet soil. Overnight, a storm had brushed the ridges, leaving the streets slick and the wooden porches glistening with beads of rainwater. A thin veil of mist clung to the valley floor, softening the outlines of houses and blurring the edges of the small town. Inside the modest Calder home, a narrow two-story house painted faded blue with a porch sagging slightly in the middle, Officer Ethan Calder awoke to the sound of his sister's voice. Maya knelt on the floor of the small living room, her braids messy from sleep, still wearing her oversized nightshirt dotted with yellow stars. She had drawn an old quilt from the closet and spread it beneath the German shepherd, who lay curled with a kind of weary resignation. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, his flanks rising and falling with the rhythm of someone who had learned to endure. Maya stroked his fur gently with one hand while whispering, "You're safe now, I promise." Ethan stood in the doorway, arms folded, uncertain. The events of the night before clung to him, Raymond Pike's smirk, the cardboard sign, the way the man had vanished into the crowd. His instincts told him that their encounter had been more than chance, yet the sight before him tugged at something quieter. His sister, so small yet so determined, cradling a creature the world had discarded. Ethan sighed, ran a hand over his face, and stepped into the room. "We need to decide what to call him," Maya announced, glancing up. Her eyes were bright with the stubborn hope only children could carry. "Maybe we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves," Ethan replied, lowering himself to one knee beside the dog. He studied the shepherd more closely now. The dog was older, perhaps 8 or 9 years, his muzzle frosted with gray, his frame large but diminished by hunger. His paws were scarred, pads worn rough by hard ground, and his bent ear gave him a lopsided appearance both pitiful and strangely noble. There was intelligence in his eyes, though it was veiled by fatigue. Maya pursed her lips. "He needs a name. Names mean belonging." She tapped her chin thoughtfully, then whispered, "Shadow." She smiled when the word left her mouth. "Because he follows quietly, like a shadow that doesn't go away." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Shadow, huh?" He watched as the dog flicked his tail faintly at the sound of the name, as though acknowledging it. Ethan let out a slow breath. "All right, Shadow it is." Later that morning, their neighbor Clara Jensen stopped by. Clara was 26, a school teacher at Ravenwood Elementary. She was of medium height, with chestnut hair that she usually tied into a neat bun during school hours, though today she wore it loose, falling over her shoulders. Her figure was slim but not fragile, her movements purposeful and calm. Clara had a kind face with expressive hazel eyes that revealed both warmth and a guardedness earned from a difficult past. She had grown up caring for her younger siblings after her father abandoned the family, which gave her a quiet empathy toward children who carried burdens too early. She knocked on the door, holding a bag of fresh rolls from the bakery down the street. "Morning," she greeted when Ethan opened the door, her voice carrying the cheerfulness she always used with her students. Her eyes immediately fell on the shepherd lying on the quilt. "Well, who's this?" Maya beamed. "His name is Shadow. We saved him yesterday." Clara stepped inside, crouching near the dog, but keeping her distance respectfully. "Shadow?" she repeated softly. Her gaze lingered on the scars around his neck, the stiffness in his hind leg. "He's been through a lot." She looked up at Ethan, her tone careful. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ethan shrugged, though unease flickered in his eyes. "It wasn't exactly planned, but Maya insisted." Clara smiled gently. "She has a good heart. Sometimes animals find us when we need them most." She reached into her bag, handing Maya one of the rolls. "Here, little one, but maybe save some for him too." For the rest of the morning, Maya busied herself building a corner for Shadow. She carried old blankets, filled a bowl with water, and set one of the rolls in front of him, breaking it into small pieces. The shepherd sniffed cautiously, then ate slowly, his tail moving in the faintest wag. Maya clapped her hands. "See, Ethan? He belongs here." In the afternoon, Ethan stepped onto the porch where Clara lingered, sipping from a thermos of tea. The mist had lifted, revealing Ravenwood's ridges in crisp outlines, green slopes meeting blue sky. Clara leaned on the porch railing, her eyes following the children playing down the street. "I can help you if you need," she said quietly. "With food, maybe advice on care. My dad used to train dogs for search and rescue. I remember enough to get by." Ethan studied her profile, the strength behind her calm demeanor, the way she had stepped into responsibility long before she should have. For a moment, he felt a kinship with her, as though both had been shaped by losses that demanded resilience. "Thanks," he said. "I might take you up on that." That evening, as twilight settled and the sky blushed in hues of violet and orange, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, reviewing paperwork while Maya drew in her sketchbook. Shadow lay nearby, head resting on his paws, his eyes following every movement. Maya sketched a picture of the three of them, herself, Ethan, and Shadow, standing in front of their house. She held up the paper proudly. "We're a family now." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her not to get too attached, that they didn't know the dog's past, that danger might linger in its silence. Yet when he looked into Shadow's eyes, he felt the echo of something familiar, loyalty, bruised but not broken. He said nothing, only reached out to ruffle Maya's hair. Outside, night deepened over Ravenwood. Lights from the diner blinked faintly down the street, and the town settled into quiet. Inside the Calder home, for the first time in a long time, warmth seemed to fill the rooms, not from the modest lamps, but from the presence of a stranger who no longer felt entirely like a stranger. Shadow closed his eyes, and Maya whispered to him, "Good night, Shadow. You're ours now." The sun rose gently over Ravenwood, casting long fingers of pale gold across the rooftops. The mountain air had lost some of its bite from the night before, though the scent of wet earth lingered after the passing storm. A chorus of birdsong spilled from the pine woods that bordered the town, filling the air with a fragile optimism. Inside the Calder home, Maya was already awake, kneeling beside Shadow with a bowl of warm water and an old sponge she had begged Ethan to let her use. "Hold still, boy," she whispered, her small hands tentative yet determined. Shadow obeyed in silence, his eyes following her with a patience uncommon in a dog that had known hardship. His ears twitched with every movement, though his body remained still, as though he understood she meant no harm. Ethan, still in a faded gray t-shirt and jeans, leaned against the kitchen doorway, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. He watched as Maya worked, carefully wiping the dirt from the dog's fur. She was meticulous, her brows furrowed, lips pressed tight in concentration. The girl who had once struggled with chores seemed tireless when it came to this animal. Ethan's heart clenched. Maya had found in Shadow something she hadn't had in years, a confidant. As the sponge traveled along Shadow's neck, Maya froze. Her fingers brushed against a thickened groove of skin, hairless and puckered. She gasped and turned to Ethan. "Ethan, look at this." He set down his mug and knelt beside them. The mark was unmistakable, a deep scar that circled the dog's throat like a cruel necklace. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's from a collar," he muttered, "but not a regular one, too deep. Someone must have chained him for months." Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. "Who would do that?" Shadow shifted slightly, his body trembling with the memory of old pain. Ethan ran a hand over his head, feeling the coarse fur give way to more scars along the ribs. His palm paused at the hind leg, where bone had once broken and healed poorly, leaving the limbs stiff. He whispered, "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Later that afternoon, Clara Jensen returned. She wore a cream-colored blouse tucked into a navy skirt, her hair pinned back neatly after teaching at the elementary school. She carried a canvas tote filled with notebooks and, tucked on top, a small tin of biscuits. Her eyes softened when she saw Shadow stretched across the rug. "How's our patient?" she asked. Maya jumped up. "He let me clean him, but Ethan found scars, lots of them." She pointed to the dog's neck with wide eyes. Clara crouched and studied the marks carefully, her brow furrowing. She had grown up watching her father, a former search and rescue handler, train German shepherds, and the sight struck her with familiarity. "That's no ordinary stray," she said quietly. "See how he sits? Upright, alert even when resting. And those eyes? Watching, calculating. This dog has training." Ethan narrowed his gaze. "Training like what?" Clara looked up at him, her expression serious. "Like law enforcement or military K-9 units. My dad used to say you can always tell. Even when they're broken, they carry discipline in their bones." Ethan leaned back, unsettled. The possibility gnawed at him. If Shadow had once belonged to such a unit, then how had he ended up tied to a vagabond with a $5 sign? That evening, Clara stayed for dinner. She had offered to cook, and though Ethan resisted at first, Maya's eager nodding overruled him. Clara proved efficient in the small kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she stirred a pot of stew. She moved with practiced grace, not fussy but steady, and filled the house with the scent of rosemary and broth. Ethan realized she had likely spent much of her youth preparing meals for her siblings. It made sense. Her calmness came not from ease, but from years of responsibility. As they ate, Maya chattered about her day, about school, about how Shadow had wagged his tail when she hummed. Clara listened with genuine interest, smiling and asking questions, while Ethan occasionally interjected. For the first time since their parents' death, Their dining table felt less like a place of duty and more like a place of belonging. After dinner, Maya carried her sketchbook into the living room and began sketching Shadow once again, this time tracing carefully the scar across his neck. "I want to remember that he survived," she explained, "because it makes him strong." Ethan ruffled her hair. "It makes you strong, too." Shadow lay beside Maya, his head resting on her lap. Clara leaned back in the armchair, watching them both, her eyes distant. "My dad had a dog once," she said softly. "Her name was Sage. She saved 2 hikers in a snowstorm, but came back frostbitten. Even when she was old and limping, she never forgot her training. When I look at Shadow, I see that same light in his eyes, a will that refuses to be snuffed out." Ethan met her gaze across the room. In that moment, he realized Clara was not merely being polite. She felt a connection to this dog as well. Perhaps they all did. As the night deepened and the last of the dishes were washed, Clara excused herself. At the door, she turned to Ethan. "Be careful," she said. "If Shadow really was trained, then someone out there discarded him. And people who discard animals like him usually have something to hide." Ethan nodded slowly, the words settling in his chest. He watched her walk down the street, her silhouette framed against the dim glow of Ravenwood's lamps. Inside, Maya had fallen asleep on the rug, her hand still resting on Shadow's back. The shepherd opened one eye as Ethan approached, as if to say, "I'll watch her. You can rest." Ethan crouched beside them, pulling a blanket over his sister. His gaze returned to the scars beneath Shadow's fur. They were not merely marks of suffering, they were evidence, clues to a story that was far from over. That night, as the quiet wrapped around the house, Ethan realized that Shadow had not just wandered into their lives by accident. The dog carried a history etched into his very skin, a history that might one day demand answers. But for now, within the safety of their modest home, Maya's words lingered like a vow. He was strong because he had survived, and perhaps so were they. The night in Ravenwood was different after rain. The streets gleamed with the reflection of the moon, each puddle carrying a slice of silver. The town's wooden storefronts stood hushed, their neon signs flickering faintly as though reluctant to stay awake. Wind moved through the pine trees that ringed the valley, carrying with it the smell of wet bark and earth. Ethan Calder sat at his desk in the corner of his room, papers spread out but his mind elsewhere. The scars on Shadow's body weighed heavily in his thoughts, and Clara's words echoed. Someone who discards a dog like this usually has something to hide. Shadow stirred near the back door, his ears twitching at something beyond the walls. He rose slowly, then suddenly stiffened, body alert, hackles raised. Ethan noticed at once. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. The dog padded toward the door, claws clicking against the floor, and gave a low rumble from deep in his chest. Maya was asleep upstairs, the house otherwise silent. Yet Shadow's focus never wavered. Ethan grabbed his jacket, his flashlight, and his duty pistol. When he opened the door, Shadow surged forward into the night, moving with surprising speed for a dog once starved and limping. The streets were empty, lamps casting long, thin pools of light. Shadow did not trot aimlessly. He ran with intent, nose low, weaving between houses until he reached the edge of town, where asphalt gave way to gravel and gravel to dirt paths. Ethan followed, his boots crunching against the road, the mist clinging to his jeans. They passed the old grain silos and followed a narrow trail leading toward the industrial fringe of Ravenwood, where warehouses from a bygone era still stood. At last, Shadow stopped before a structure Ethan barely remembered. The warehouse was long abandoned, its corrugated metal roof rusted through in places, walls graffitied with faded paint. Weeds crawled up its sides, and several windows had been smashed by rocks. A bent chain-link fence surrounded the lot, sagging with years of neglect. Shadow pressed his nose to a gap and whined, his body trembling with urgency. Ethan ducked through the fence, flashlight sweeping across the yard. The ground was littered with broken crates and scraps of wire. Shadow moved to a side door where the metal hung askew on its hinges. He nosed it open and slipped inside. Ethan followed, his senses sharp, the smell of damp and rot filling his nostrils. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark interior. Rows of cages lined the far wall, Some had collapsed, their bars twisted and rusted, while others stood intact, doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Scratch marks etched the concrete beneath them, desperate grooves carved deep. In one cage lay a length of heavy chain with a broken clasp, and nearby a nylon collar stiffened with dried mud. Ethan's chest tightened. Shadow growled low, leading Ethan deeper into the building. They passed a pile of moldy blankets, a rusted food bowl, and papers scattered across a desk half buried under dust. Ethan reached for one, brushing it clean. His pulse quickened. It was a ledger with columns of breeds, weights, and amounts written in hurried script. At the top of one page, faint but legible, a stamp read, Unit 12, hold for transfer. Ethan had heard whispers in the department 2 years back, rumors of dogs stolen, trained, or sold under the table. It had never become a formal case. There hadn't been proof. Yet here it was, in his hands. The sound of footsteps startled him. He switched off his flashlight instantly, crouching low. The creak came from the far end of the warehouse, where crates were stacked in a makeshift partition. Shadow bared his teeth, silent but ready. Slowly, Ethan edged around the barrier. The space behind was empty, yet on a desk lay fresh cigarette butts, the embers still faintly glowing. Someone had been here minutes ago. Shadow sniffed the ground, then barked once, sharp, commanding. The sound bounced off the walls like an accusation. Ethan's heart pounded. Whoever had used this warehouse wasn't just some drifter. This was organized. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos. The cages, the ledger, the desk. Evidence. Enough to start a report. He reached down to stroke Shadow's head. "Good work, boy," he murmured. Shadow pressed closer, his body tense, as though the memories of his own captivity lingered in this place. As they exited, Ethan noticed a movement at the corner of the lot. A figure stood briefly under the moonlight. A man in a dark jacket, tall, shoulders narrow, but posture tense. He lit a cigarette, the flare illuminating his angular face for only a second, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes that darted with suspicion. Then he melted back into the shadows. Ethan's instincts surged. He had just seen someone connected, but chasing now, without backup, with Maya asleep at home, was reckless. He gritted his teeth and let the figure vanish into the trees. By the time Ethan and Shadow returned home, dawn was brushing the horizon with pale blue. The house was quiet except for the creak of stairs. Maya stood there, her nightshirt trailing, hair tangled, eyes half asleep. "Where did you go?" she asked, voice groggy. Ethan hesitated, then forced a smile. "Shadow needed some air. Go back to bed, Squirt." Maya yawned, unconvinced but too tired to press. She padded upstairs again. Shadow lay down by the door, his body finally relaxing, but Ethan remained awake, his mind burning with questions. The next day, Ethan stopped at the police station to drop off routine reports. Behind the counter sat Sergeant Frank Dillard, a veteran officer in his mid-50s. Dillard was a broad man with thinning gray hair and a belly earned from years of diner meals, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Known for being gruff but fair, he had served Ravenwood PD for over 3 decades. His pragmatism sometimes brushed against Ethan's idealism. "You look like hell," Dillard said, squinting at him as Ethan handed in the paperwork. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan muttered. Dillard leaned back in his chair. "That dog of yours keeping you up? Folks are talking. Not every day you see a young officer dragging home a half-dead shepherd." His words weren't cruel, just blunt. Ethan considered his next move. He wanted to tell Dillard everything, the cages, the ledger, the figure in the dark, but his gut urged caution. Without solid proof, he risked sounding paranoid, and something about the way the figure had disappeared unsettled him deeply. Instead, he simply nodded and left, though the sergeant's piercing eyes followed him all the way out. That evening, Clara stopped by again. She wore casual clothes now, faded jeans, a gray sweater, her hair tied back loosely. She brought a small first aid kit. "For Shadow," she explained, crouching beside the dog to clean his paws. Ethan thanked her, but his mind lingered on the warehouse. He nearly told her, but stopped himself. Clara had already carried too many burdens in her life. He wouldn't add danger to them. Later, when Maya had gone to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, photos spread across the wood. Shadow lay at his feet, his breathing heavy. Ethan touched the scar on the dog's neck gently. "You didn't just survive this," he whispered. "You led me to it. Why? What do you remember?" Shadow lifted his head, eyes reflecting the lamplight. And for a moment, Ethan swore the dog understood. The house settled into silence, but Ethan's resolve sharpened. The scars were not only Shadow's story, they were a map. And the warehouse, with its cages and ledgers, was only the beginning. The sky over Ravenwood the Saturday morning was painted in muted grays, the kind of overcast blanket that promised rain but delivered only a heavy stillness. The streets were quieter than usual, shops opening late, children playing indoors. The Calder house, with its creaking porch and peeling paint, hummed with the sound of Maya's voice as she tugged on her sneakers. Ethan had promised her a walk by the river trail, a chance to stretch Shadow's legs after his restless night. Shadow, though older, moved with a steadiness that belied his scars, his amber eyes scanning the world as though every detail mattered. Ethan wore his usual off-duty clothes, a dark jacket and jeans, his badge tucked away. He was restless, the discovery of the warehouse still gnawing at his conscience. He had not shared the details with Maya, not wanting to pull her into something that could easily turn dangerous. Clara had pressed him gently about it the night before, but he'd only told her part of the truth. He wasn't sure if he could trust the system yet, or if he needed to keep following the threads on his own. The path to the river wound past rusted railings and fields of tall grass, still wet from the night's dew. Maya skipped ahead, humming, Shadow following close, his bent ear flicking at the sound of cicadas. Ethan trailed, his gaze alternating between the trees and his sister's darting form. It was Maya who heard it first, a faint whimper rising above the murmur of the river. She froze, her small frame tensing as her eyes searched beneath the bridge where shadows gathered thick. "Ethan," she whispered, "do you hear that?" Ethan listened. There it was again, a soft, pitiful cry. Before he could caution her, Maya scrambled down the embankment, her sneakers slipping on damp earth. "Maya, wait!" he called, following, but she was already crouched near a cluster of broken crates under the bridge. There, huddled in the muck, was a puppy. He was small, no more than 4 months old, with a thin body that showed every rib. His coat, once likely a warm blend of tan and black, was dulled by dirt and rain. One eye was swollen nearly shut, the other wide and terrified. His ears were floppy, his tail curled so tightly beneath him it seemed he wanted to disappear. Maya's heart clenched. She shrugged off her hoodie and wrapped it gently around the trembling creature. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, her voice softer than she knew she could make it. "You're safe now." Ethan arrived, breathless, Shadow at his side. His first instinct was frustration, Maya diving headfirst into danger again. But when he saw the pup, his anger softened into something else. The little dog's gaze was glassy with pain, and yet there was still life clinging there, fragile but insistent. "We can't just leave him," Maya said firmly, cradling the bundle against her chest. Her gray-blue eyes shimmered with tears and defiance. "You wouldn't leave him, would you?" Ethan rubbed his forehead. "Maya..." His tone was heavy with conflict. He was already stretched thin, already taking risks he couldn't explain. Yet, staring at the broken animal in his sister's arms, he knew the answer was already decided. He sighed. "Fine, but we'll take him straight home. And he's going to the vet." They returned slowly, Ethan keeping one hand on Maya's shoulder while the other steadied Shadow's leash. Passers-by on Main Street glanced at the sight. 2 children of tragedy, a weary officer, an old shepherd, and now another lost soul bundled in fabric. Among them was Mrs. Janine Rowley, a widow in her late 60s. She was tall and thin, her silver hair always wound into a severe bun. She had a reputation in town for her sharp tongue and her dislike of disorder, often scolding children for cutting across her garden. She stood outside the grocery store now, clutching her basket of apples, frowning as Maya carried the pup. "What's that you've got there?" she demanded. Her voice cracked like dry twigs, but her eyes, gray and sharp, softened almost imperceptibly at the sight of the bundle moving in Maya's arms. "A puppy," Maya said boldly, "and his name is Rust." She had decided it in that instant, inspired by the color of the pup's muddied coat and the rusted metal that had sheltered him. "Rust," Mrs. Rowley repeated, as though testing it. She pursed her lips, then muttered, "Humph, just make sure he's fed." With that, she stalked off, though not without a backward glance. Ethan raised an eyebrow at the unexpected softness. Back at the Calder home, Clara arrived soon after, summoned by Maya's excited call. She wore casual clothes again, a pale blue cardigan over jeans, her hair loose. Her hazel eyes widened when she saw the pup. "Oh, you poor thing," she breathed, kneeling beside Maya. She was calm, her hands sure, checking gently for wounds. "He's dehydrated, malnourished. That eye will need ointment, but he's a fighter. I can tell." Rust whimpered but didn't resist as Clara cleaned him with a warm cloth, Maya holding his paw. Shadow hovered nearby, sniffing cautiously, then gave the puppy's ear a small nudge. It was a quiet gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Rust nestled deeper into Maya's arms, sighing in exhausted trust. As evening fell, Ethan found himself once again at the kitchen table, paperwork untouched. Across the room, Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, Rust curled in her lap, Shadow lying protectively close. Clara was beside them, her calm voice carrying stories of her father's rescues, of nights when he had brought home half-frozen strays and nursed them back to life. The room, for the first time in years, felt alive with something larger than grief. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He was beginning to see a pattern. Shadow had led him to evidence of cruelty. Maya had stumbled upon Rust, another discarded life. And Clara, though she claimed she was simply helping, had begun weaving herself into the very fabric of their days. It all felt less like coincidence and more like threads pulling towards something inevitable. That night, after Maya was tucked into bed with Rust curled against her side, Ethan stepped onto the porch with Shadow. The air was cool, filled with the chirp of crickets. He looked at the shepherd, the scars etched across his body. "You didn't just find us by chance, did you?" he murmured. Shadow's gaze held steady, his silence speaking more than words could. Ethan knew then that their story was only beginning, and that every stray they encountered carried with it a piece of the truth waiting to be uncovered. The evening settled heavy over Ravenwood, the sky bruised purple with the weight of an oncoming storm. Street lamps buzzed faintly against the mist that crept from the woods, and Main Street emptied earlier than usual, as though the town itself sensed unease. Inside the Calder house, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his jacket draped over the chair, eyes fixed on the stack of photographs he had taken in the abandoned warehouse. Cages rusted through, scratch marks on concrete, ledgers listing breeds and numbers like commodities. Every detail gnawed at him, demanding answers he could no longer ignore. Shadow lay by the door, his chest rising steady, but his ears alert to every sound outside. Beside him, Rust, still thin but improving, nestled against his side as if the older shepherd were both guardian and teacher. Maya had long since gone to bed, curled around her stuffed rabbit and with Rust's paw tucked under her arm. Ethan rubbed his temples, fatigue pressing against his skull. He knew he couldn't hold the truth in much longer. The knock came just after 9. Clara Jensen stood on the porch, wrapped in a raincoat, her chestnut hair damp at the ends, her hazel eyes sharp despite the hour. She carried a folder in one hand, her expression equal parts hesitation and resolve. Ethan let her in, and she laid the folder on the table. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. Inside were old clippings, photographs yellowed with time, and a thin stack of reports she had borrowed from her late father's files. One picture in particular caught Ethan's breath. A younger German shepherd, strong and sleek, his coat black and tan, his ears proud, his gaze focused with the intensity of a soldier. On his collar hung a tag engraved with a single word: Valor. Clara's voice softened as she spoke. "My dad worked with search and rescue, but he also had friends in law enforcement. He kept articles about the dogs he admired. This one, Valor. He was part of a narcotics task force upstate. They said he saved officers' lives more than once." She turned the photo toward Ethan. "Look closely. The bent ear, the scar above the paw. Ethan, this is Shadow." Ethan stared, his heart thudding. The resemblance was undeniable. Shadow stirred, lifting his head, and for a moment Ethan swore recognition passed between the dog and the photograph. He whispered, "So you weren't just discarded, you were betrayed." Before Clara could answer, another knock sounded, this one heavier, deliberate. Ethan's instincts flared. He motioned for Clara to stay quiet, tucked the folder under the table, and opened the door only part way. A man stood there, tall, mid-40s, with neatly cut dark hair graying at the temples, his suit tailored but worn at the edges, as if bought in better times. His features were angular, cheekbones sharp, and his eyes cold blue that revealed nothing but calculation. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to command. "Officer Calder," he said smoothly, his voice low and measured. "Name's Victor Hale. Thought it was time we talked." Ethan's grip tightened on the door. He had heard the name whispered in briefings. A businessman turned questionable investor, rumored ties to smuggling, but never caught. Victor smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'm not here officially, just neighborly concern. Word travels fast in a town like this. Seems you've been poking around old warehouses, finding strays." His gaze drifted past Ethan, landing on Shadow with unsettling precision. That one especially. Ethan stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The air smelled of rain. The storm closed now. "You've got 2 minutes," he said. Victor chuckled, though the sound carried no warmth. "Direct. I like that. Here's the thing. Some businesses operate better when questions aren't asked. You found one of our storage sites. Now, I could let you chase phantoms until your badge weighs you down. Or you could walk away, enjoy your quiet life, raise your sister, keep the mutt. Everyone wins." The implied threat hung thick. Ethan kept his face still, though his pulse raced. "And if I don't?" Victor leaned closer, his cologne sharp, his words colder. "Then accidents happen, to dogs, to children." His eyes gleamed as lightning split the sky above them. "You understand." Ethan's hand itched toward his holster, but he forced himself steady. "Get off my porch," he said flatly. Victor straightened, the faintest smirk curling his lips. "You're braver than I expected, but bravery gets lonely. Remember that." He turned, walking calmly into the mist as though he had all the time in the world. A black sedan idled at the corner, headlights flicking on as he approached. Inside, Clara's face was pale when Ethan re-entered. She had heard enough through the thin walls. "Ethan, this isn't just about stray dogs," she whispered. "This is organized, dangerous." Ethan sat heavily, Shadow pressing close against his leg. He felt the weight of the photo in his pocket, the image of valor staring back at him through time. "I know," he murmured, "and now they know I know." Later that night, when the storm broke over Ravenwood, Ethan lay awake listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Clara had stayed to help settle Maya after a bad dream, and now slept in the guest room, her breathing faint through the walls. Shadow lay at the foot of Ethan's bed, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Rust snored softly in Maya's room, innocent in his exhaustion. Ethan reached down, his hand resting on Shadow's scarred neck. "Valor," he whispered, testing the name. Shadow's ears twitched, and he let out a low, steady sigh, as if acknowledging the truth. Ethan closed his eyes, the storm outside raging, but inside, a vow forming. He would not let Victor Hale's threats stand. For Maya, for Clara, for Rust, and for the dog who had once been Valor. The storm that had shaken Ravenwood the night before left the town washed and silent. Puddles glistened in the cracks of Main Street, and the morning air smelled of wet pine. Yet beneath the freshness lingered a heaviness, the kind that settled when danger was too close to name. Ethan Calder hadn't slept much. Victor Hale's visit haunted him, each word a threat sharper than steel. But the hardest part was looking at Maya over breakfast, pretending everything was normal while knowing a man like Hale had spoken her name without saying it. Maya, though young, was far from naive. Her small frame, messy ponytail, and bright gray-blue eyes made her look like any other 9-year-old, but Ethan had long known she noticed more than she admitted. That morning, she was quieter, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, sneaking glances at Ethan when she thought he wasn't looking. Shadow lay at her feet, protective, and Russ nibbled clumsily at crumbs beside him. When Clara stopped by mid-morning, wearing a pale green sweater and carrying her satchel of lesson plans, she noticed the tension immediately. "You both look like you didn't sleep," she remarked gently. Her hazel eyes lingered on Ethan, silently asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. Ethan forced a smile. "Just a long night?" Clara wasn't convinced, but she let it be. She bent to scratch Shadow's head and ruffle Russ's floppy ears. For a moment, the house felt like it always should. Quiet, safe, filled with ordinary voices. But that illusion began to fracture by afternoon. Ethan had to check in at the precinct for routine paperwork. He left Maya under Clara's care, grateful that she had offered to stay. But Maya, restless, decided she was done being treated like a child who couldn't understand. She had overheard more than Ethan realized, snippets of Victor Hale's voice through the thin wooden door the night before, her brother's tense whisper, Clara's worried tone. And so, when Ethan left, Maya packed her small backpack with a flashlight, notebook, and granola bars. She told Clara she was just playing in the backyard, then quietly slipped out the side gate once Clara turned her attention to grading papers at the kitchen table. Shadow, sensing her departure, trotted after her without hesitation. Rust hesitated at the door, whining softly, but remained with Clara. Maya's plan was simple. Follow Ethan. She pedaled her old bicycle down Ravenwood's cracked sidewalks, Shadow loping alongside. She knew the way to the station but kept her distance, hiding behind trees and cars whenever she thought Ethan might glance back. Her heart thumped with both fear and excitement. At the precinct, Ethan was met by Sergeant Frank Dillard, the veteran officer with gruff manners and thinning gray hair. Dillard leaned back in his chair, sipping black coffee. "Heard Hale was sniffing around you," he muttered. "Careful with that one. He's got roots deeper than pine trees in these mountains." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You knew he was still active?" Dillard shrugged. "Everyone knows. Just no one wants to tangle with him. Too many favors owed, too many blind eyes." His gaze hardened. "But you've already been noticed. That's a dangerous place to stand, Calder." Ethan filed his paperwork quickly. His stomach knotted. He had no idea that Maya, hiding with Shadow near the side of the building, caught part of the conversation through a half-open window. Her small fingers clutched her notebook as she scribbled one word again and again. Hale. Meanwhile, across town, Clara finished her grading and stepped outside to hang laundry. She noticed a man leaning against a dark sedan across the street. He was tall, with a shaved head and a weathered leather jacket. His jaw was square, lips thin, and his expression blank but unsettling. When their eyes met, he tipped his chin in a mock greeting before lighting a cigarette. Clara's pulse quickened. The man was Dean Morley, one of Hale's enforcers, known in whispers but rarely seen in daylight. Mid-30s, built like a brawler, with a history of bar fights that never led to charges. His demeanor was deliberate, like someone who enjoyed watching unease unfold. Clara quickly gathered the laundry, retreating inside, but the image of Dean standing watch burned in her mind. She locked the door and checked on Rust, who whined nervously at the window. By late afternoon, Ethan returned home, exhausted but sharper than when he'd left. He immediately noticed Maya's bike missing. Panic surged through him, and he spun toward Clara. "Where is she?" Clara's face drained of color. "She said she was in the yard." Her voice faltered. "Ethan, there was a man across the street. I think Hale has us under watch." Ethan didn't waste another second. He whistled sharply and Shadow darted out from the trees, returning with his tongue lolling and paws muddy. Relief surged that the shepherd was still with Maya, but the fact he returned alone sent Ethan's heart into his throat. Moments later, the door creaked. Maya stepped inside, dirt on her knees, her backpack sagging. Shadow padded behind her, calm but vigilant. Ethan's face hardened, caught between fury and fear. "Where were you?" he demanded. Maya's chin trembled, but she lifted it. "I followed you. I heard what Sergeant Dillard said. I know about Hale. You can't just keep me in the dark." She pulled her notebook from her bag, pages filled with messy writing. "If we're in danger, I want to help." The room was silent, broken only by the crackle of the old wall clock. Clara knelt beside Maya, her hazel eyes soft but firm. "Sweetheart, you are brave, braver than most adults I know. But this isn't just about being brave. It's about being safe, and Hale doesn't play fair. Ethan dropped to one knee, his hand on Maya's shoulder. His voice, though stern, carried the weight of love. "Maya, if anything happened to you, I couldn't bear it. Promise me you won't run off again." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Only if you promise to tell me the truth." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Deal." That night, as shadows lengthened across Ravenwood, Clara drew Ethan aside. Her voice was hushed. "Dean Morley, he was watching the house. If Hale is sending his people this close, it means he's testing us, seeing how we react." Ethan looked toward the window, where Shadow and Rust both slept close to Maya's bed. His jaw tightened. "Then he'll find out we don't scare easy." Night returned to Ravenwood with a weight that felt heavier than usual, the sky dark and low, as if the clouds themselves were crouching over the town. The faint glow of street lamps barely reached across the damp sidewalks, and the silence carried the kind of tension that made every creak of a porch step sound like a warning. Inside the Calder home, Ethan had made up his mind. They could not stay here much longer. Hale had already sent Dean Morley to linger outside. Clara had been rattled, and Maya's stubborn courage placed her squarely in danger. Ethan waited until Maya had changed into her pajamas, her backpack still half hidden under the bed from her earlier adventure. He tucked her in and then leaned close. "Maya, we're going on a short trip tonight. Pack a few things. Don't ask questions right now. Just trust me." Her eyes widened, part fear, part excitement. But she nodded. She had seen the look in his eyes before, steady but edged with urgency. Shadow padded into the room, and Rust followed, tail low. They seemed to understand before anyone else that the family was about to move. Clara stood by the window downstairs, her arms crossed tight. She had changed from her teaching clothes into something simpler. Dark jeans, a fitted jacket, sneakers. Her hazel eyes reflected both worry and determination. "Where will you take us?" she asked, as Ethan carried Maya's bag down. "There's an old cabin near Pike Hollow," Ethan replied. "Used to belong to a retired officer. Empty now, but safe enough. No one will think to look there." Clara nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line. "If Hale has eyes everywhere, he'll find out sooner or later." "Then we'll be ready," Ethan said firmly. They left quietly, the house behind them cloaked in shadow. Ethan drove his old cruiser, its headlights dimmed low as it rolled out of Ravenwood. Maya sat in the back seat between Shadow and Rust, clutching the shepherd's scarred neck with one hand and Rust's small paw with the other. Clara rode in silence beside Ethan, her satchel on her lap. But the night had plans of its own. Halfway to Pike Hollow, as the road curved along the wooded stretch past Miller's quarry, a set of headlights flared behind them. Ethan's pulse spiked. The vehicle gained quickly, its engine growling, too deliberate to be coincidence. He pressed his foot harder to the accelerator. The black SUV swerved closer, its bumper brushing the cruiser's rear. Maya gasped and clung tighter to the dogs. Clara turned, her face pale in the dashboard glow. "It's them!" Shadow growled, his body bristling, while Rust whimpered but stayed pressed against Maya's side. Ethan gritted his teeth and pulled sharply onto a side road that led into the quarry's old access trail. Gravel spat beneath the tires, dust rising in a choking cloud. The SUV followed. Ethan slammed the brakes near an abandoned loading bay, ushering Maya and Clara out. "Stay low, stay behind the concrete," he ordered, voice sharp but calm. Clara grabbed Maya's hand, pulling her toward the rusted structure. Shadow bounded after them, positioning himself like a soldier, ears pricked, eyes scanning the dark. 3 figures spilled from the SUV. Dean Morley was in front, his leather jacket glinting faintly. His shaved head caught the light of a half moon, and his smirk carried cruel amusement. "Told you, Calder," he drawled. "You should have listened when Hale gave you the chance." Behind him came 2 more men. The first was Reed Kavanaugh, mid-30s, stocky with a square jaw, tattoos winding up his thick arms, his hands calloused from years of rough work. His eyes carried the vacant gleam of someone who obeyed without thought. The second was Earl Danner, leaner, in his late 20s, his dark hair greasy, his body jittering with nervous energy. He had the twitchy demeanor of a man too eager to prove himself, a shadow of fear beneath his bravado. Ethan squared his shoulders, stepping out from behind the cruiser. His pistol hung low but steady in his hand. "This ends here, Dean. Walk away." Dean laughed, a low, harsh sound that echoed against the quarry walls. "You've got guts, but guts don't matter when you're outnumbered." Before Ethan could reply, Shadow lunged forward, placing himself between his family and the men. His body was tense, his scars visible in the moonlight, and for a moment, even Dean faltered under the shepherd's fierce stance. "That's the mutt," Dean spat. "Hale wants him back, alive if possible, dead if not." Maya, hiding behind the concrete barrier, pressed her hands over her ears, whispering to Clara, "He's Valor. They know him." Clara pulled her close, heart hammering, but her gaze remained fixed on Ethan. The standoff cracked in an instant. Reed rushed first, swinging a length of pipe he had pulled from the SUV. Ethan fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. The sound echoed like thunder. Reed stumbled but didn't stop. That was when Shadow charged, teeth bared, colliding with the man's arm. Reed howled, the pipe clattering to the ground as Shadow dragged him sideways, snapping and growling with raw fury. At the same time, Earl tried to circle toward Clara and Maya, knife glinting in his hand. Clara, though trembling, grabbed a broken plank from the ground and swung with surprising force, striking his forearm. Earl cursed, dropping the blade, and Clara shoved Maya further behind cover. Rust barked shrill and frantic, his small frame vibrating with courage far beyond his size. Dean advanced on Ethan, a pistol of his own now raised. The two men faced each other in the dusty moonlight. One lawman bound by duty, the other outlaw bound by greed. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat time, seemed to hold. But it was Valor, Shadow, who broke the stalemate. With Reed subdued, the shepherd pivoted, launching himself at Dean with the force of memory and training. His jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, forcing the gun to the ground. Ethan surged forward, kicking the weapon away and pinning Dean against the SUV. Clara rushed to collect the knife Earl had dropped, her hands shaking but resolute. The quarry fell into tense silence. Reed groaned, clutching his bleeding arm. Earl stumbled backward, his bravado broken, while Dean spat curses through clenched teeth, Shadow still holding his wrist in an unyielding grip. Ethan's breath came heavy as he cuffed Dean with the set he always carried. "Tell Hale," he said coldly. "I'm not afraid of him, and neither is Valor." He glanced at Shadow, the name rolling off his tongue naturally now. The shepherd released his grip, standing tall despite his limp, his chest heaving with both exhaustion and triumph. Clara gathered Maya in her arms. The girl was trembling, but her eyes shone with fierce pride. "He saved us," she whispered. Ethan looked at all of them, Maya, Clara, Rust, and Valor, and realized the truth Victor Hale had never considered. This wasn't just one man's fight. This was a family, bound not by blood alone, but by loyalty, by survival, and by a love that refused to bend. The dawn that broke over Ravenwood was brittle and gray, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise. Mist crawled over the pines that framed the town, muffling sound, lending the streets a hushed quality that felt unnatural. Ethan Calder hadn't slept after the quarry ambush. His bruises still ached, and the metallic taste of tension clung to his mouth. But his resolve was iron. Dean Morley was behind bars now. Reed and Earl were in holding cells, but Victor Hale remained free and dangerous. Until Hale was confronted, no one was safe. Inside the Calder home, Maya sat cross-legged on the couch with Rust in her lap, and Shadow stretched protectively at her feet. Clara brewed coffee in the kitchen, her pale green sweater wrinkled, her hazel eyes still clouded with fatigue. But when she looked at Ethan, she didn't see fear, only determination. "Are you really going after him today?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "It ends today." He met her eyes. "You don't have to come." Clara straightened, her slim frame tense with quiet defiance. "Yes, I do. He's had people watching my house, my school. If this ends today, then I'm part of it." Maya's small voice piped up from the couch. "Then I'm part of it too." Ethan crouched in front of her, brushing a stray lock of blonde hair from her face. "No, Maya, not this time. You've already been braver than I ever wanted you to be. Today you stay safe with Clara's friend. That friend was Sarah Whitaker, a neighbor Clara had called earlier. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and lean, her auburn hair streaked with gray and pulled back into a loose bun. She had warm brown eyes but carried a sharpness earned through hardship. Once a nurse, she had left the hospital after losing her husband in a car accident, choosing instead to work part-time at the town library. People knew her as kind but reserved, the sort of woman who preferred listening to talking. When she arrived at the Calder home, wearing a simple navy coat and holding a tin of homemade biscuits, she offered a steady presence Maya instantly clung to. "I'll keep her safe," Sarah promised, her voice calm, carrying the authority of someone who had faced loss and learned resilience. By mid-morning, Ethan and Clara set out. Shadow rode in the back of the cruiser, head lifted, ears pricked, while Russ stayed behind with Maya, whining at the separation. Ethan's plan wasn't reckless. He had already secured support. Sergeant Dillard, despite his usual caution, had agreed to authorize a quiet operation. Enough evidence had surfaced from the warehouse, the quarry ambush, and Dean's testimony to warrant a raid on Hale's compound. The compound sat on the outskirts of Ravenwood, hidden beyond a stretch of dirt road, shielded by old logging trucks. By the time Ethan's cruiser rolled to a stop, 2 unmarked vehicles were already there, engines off. Out stepped Dillard, his broad frame solid as ever, his uniform neat despite his years. With him were 2 other officers, Marcy Alvarez, a patrol officer in her late 20s, petite but fierce, with sharp black eyes and cropped hair that barely brushed her jaw, and Darren Cole, a rookie barely 22, lanky with sandy hair and a nervous habit of chewing his lower lip, but loyal and eager to prove himself. "This is it," Dillard muttered, scanning the tree line. "Hale's inside. Let's finish this." Ethan's eyes flicked to Clara, who stood steady despite her pale complexion. She carried no weapon but refused to leave. Her father's lessons, compassion and courage, were her armor now. They moved in silence toward the compound, Shadow weaving ahead like a dark phantom, his scars and bent ear giving him the appearance of a warrior reborn. The front gates were rusted but ajar. Inside, the compound was a sprawl of decaying buildings, kennels stacked against the walls, the stench of neglect heavy in the air. Dogs barked weakly from cages, their cries twisting through the silence. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, but her eyes hardened with resolve. From the largest warehouse, a figure emerged. Victor Hale. His suit was immaculate despite the mud, his dark hair slicked back, and his piercing blue eyes glinted with malice. Behind him were 2 more enforcers, men built like walls, their expressions blank. Hale's voice was calm, mocking. "Well, Officer Calder," he drawled, spreading his hands, "I warned you, but you had to bring friends, brave, stupid. Which will it be today?" Ethan stepped forward, pistol steady. "It's over, Hale. The cages, the ledgers, the testimony, it's enough. You're done." Hale's smile sharpened. "You think justice works in a town like this? I own the silence here." Before Ethan could respond, Shadow growled low, his body tense. Hale's men shifted, their weapons glinting. In that heartbeat of stillness, chaos erupted. One of Hale's enforcers lunged, swinging a crowbar, but Alvarez was quicker, tackling him with a force that belied her size. Darren fired a warning shot, his hands shaking, but his aim true. Clara, though unarmed, rushed to one of the kennels, unlatching the rusted door and freeing a trembling hound. The dog bolted, its bark adding to the cacophony. Hale himself moved backward, hand sliding into his jacket where a pistol waited. Ethan's eyes locked on him, but Shadow was faster. The shepherd surged forward, launching with a snarl that echoed through the compound. Hale fired, once, twice, the shots cracking the air. But Valor, as he was once known, knocked him off balance, clamping his jaws on Hale's wrist. The pistol clattered to the ground. Ethan rushed in, pinning Hale against the wall, Shadow holding firm. Dillard arrived a moment later, cuffing the man with grim efficiency. Hale sneered, his lips split, blood trickling down his chin. "You think this ends me? I'll still be here when you're dust." Ethan's voice was ice. Not this time. By the time backup arrived, the compound was secured. Dozens of dogs were freed, officers moving quickly to transport them to safety. Alvarez wiped sweat from her brow. Darren's hands still trembled, but his grin was wide, and Clara stood in the center, clutching Shadow's scarred head, whispering, "Good boy, you're home now." As the sun finally broke through the mist, Ethan looked around at his battered but standing family. Maya safe with Sarah, Clara at his side, Shadow and Rust close, and felt something he hadn't in years: peace. The ghosts of betrayal were quiet now, replaced by the sound of rescued lives beginning anew. In the end, this story is not only about a dog once forgotten, or a family fighting against the darkness around them. It is about the quiet miracles that God places in our lives, often through loyalty, love, and second chances. Just as Valor was more than a dog, we too are reminded each day that no soul is too broken for God to heal, no life too lost for Him to redeem. In our daily lives, we may face struggles, betrayals, or moments when we feel unseen. Yet God shows us again and again that His miracles come in unexpected forms: a child's compassion, a stranger's kindness, even a wounded dog who refuses to give up. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe every soul deserves a second chance, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you can join us in more stories of faith, healing, and the quiet power of love. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection.